All right, LSU football season is over. The Tigers finish top 15. We haven't seen the final rankings, but I'm sure they'll be top 15, maybe top 10 by the end of bowl season, which would be nice. 9-3, obviously not what we expected, wanted. I've called this season a disappointment. I think a lot of LSU fans out there would consider this season a disappointment. And not just because you didn't beat Alabama, you didn't beat Florida State, not for those reasons. But look, next week you might have the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, and all you could manage to do was go 9-3. No SEC championship, no college football playoff. Next year, there'd be a different story with the 12-team playoff. It's just disappointing. You had such a good offense, but the defense was bad. That's why Mike Denbrock is up for one of the best assistant coaches award in the country. Matt House, nowhere near sniffing that list. Of course, LSU's defensive coordinator. So now the question for Brian Kelly is, going into year 3, House hired when Brian Kelly got here, former Kansas City Chiefs linebacker coach, should he be retained for next season? What this really boils down to is two sides of an argument. On the one hand, LSU's defense was terrible, historically bad. Obviously, in the biggest games of the year this season, the defense was not good. FSU, they gave up 45 points, a ton of yards. Ole Miss, Alabama, same story. If you win even one of those games, you might be in a different situation right now in terms of where you're at, in terms of how you finish the season and whatnot, right? On the other side, though, you've got a defense that is so young, lacking talent, and having guys that really just did not pan out, did not meet the expectation, I would say, and we'll get into all that. So let's start with the first side of that argument. Should House be fired because the defense was just simply bad? Give you some stats. The Tigers finished 101st out of 130 teams in the FBS in total defense. Not good. At no point in time should an LSU defense, with the tradition it has, with the recruiting base it has, with the coaching staff it has, and the money to pay said coaches, finish in the bottom, third, fourth of college football teams in defense. That was terrible. They were also awful on third down, 116th out of those same 130 teams in third down defense, allowing opponents to get first downs 45% of the time. That's just a number. What does that tell me? This team got dominated in the trenches. Again, at a place like LSU, where you could go any which direction here in a 20-mile radius and grab 4, maybe 5-star players, most of those being offensive, defensive linemen, at no point in time should you be one of the worst third down defenses in the country. You have such a wide array of places you can go to get this talent and bring these guys in to be D tackles, D ends, impact-type players, linebackers even, to win on third down. Can't happen. Red zone. Saints struggle in the red zone too. We'll get into that later in the episode. You were one of the worst red zone defenses in the country. So it wasn't a situation where between the 20s, you were just bad, but you bow your neck in the red zone. They weren't even good in the red zone. So, look, all those three together, mixed in the same pot, you get a bad defense. And that's just simply what it was this year. And at different times this season, we were told, even before the Alabama game, hey, this defense is practicing better. It's a night and day difference. And then they get blown out again, boat raced again. We were sold a narrative at different times that the defense was improving. You bring in a defensive line coach. He's fixing things. You move a player to cornerback from safety. He's fixing things. No, there were never any fixes. And even the last game of the season here against Texas A&M, that offense is awful. That was their third quarterback they trotted out this season. And you gave up 30 points. You, again, were almost the reason you lost a football game. You had no business losing. Let's think about a world in which LSU doesn't have the number one offense in the country this year. What's the record? Maybe 7-5. The defense just wasn't good. But let's go to the other side of this argument. All right, I'm kind of sitting on the fence here. What can House use in these evaluation periods to tell Brian Kelly, hey, this is why the defense wasn't good this year? Mekhi Wingo, preseason All-SEC guy, missed the tail end of the season, Alabama game and on, with an injury. I mean, that's a player that you really just can't replace. They brought in Jordan Jefferson from West Virginia, and he played that D-tackle spot the last few games of the year. He was fine, but he's not a preseason All-SEC caliber player. They missed him. Mason Smith, knee injury last year. This season, all he puts up is a sack and a half and 3.5 tackles for loss. Not numbers that a former 5-star should be putting up. I know that it's hard to come back from an injury, but it wasn't like it was a beginning of the season struggle and he played well towards the end of the year. Not really. We never really saw that dominant Mason Smith we thought that we'd see. Transfers. Omar Spates from Oregon State. Awful. Did not meet my expectations at all. Was an all Pac-12 player 3 different times. 300-plus career tackles. I thought this guy was going to be a plug-and-play stud. He was terrible. He was a huge liability to this defense all year. And if your linebackers aren't playing well, I don't know how you expect your defense to play well. With that, the defensive end spot, nobody really was a consistent pressure applier. I think Braylon Swinson leads the DNs with maybe 6.5 TFLs. Like, he was fine, but like in the biggest games of the year, you give up a lot of points because you get no pressure, and you allow quarterbacks to scramble, get yards, sit in the pocket, make throws. So no pressure, DN has a lot to do with that. And then with that no pressure, it left your secondary liable. And who was in that secondary? Not Deuce Chestnut for most of the season, not Denver Harris for most of the season. They played a combined 9 games this year. They were Chestnut was your opening day starter. Harris, a lot of people thought would also be an opening day starter. Nobody knows what's up with those guys. And then Zy Alexander from Hammond America, FCS All-American, was maybe the best corner you had this year, only played 8 games, and he was really up and down. So, I mean, the personnel itself wasn't too good. So now Brian Kelly has a decision to make. Was it Matt House's fault? Was the defensive game planning bad? Did he not get enough out of the defense with the guys he had? And, of course, you had Jimmy Lindsey, the D-line coach, who was out for most of the year with a health-related issue. When you lose a position coach like that right before the season, I mean, that's tough to come back from, right? So was it the coaching or was it the lack of personnel? The D-line wasn't good. The linebackers weren't very good. And the secondary, you know how bad the secondary was. What was it more of? And do you want to develop the players you have with the coaches you've had in place already for a couple years, or do you want to just scrap it all and try something new? That's the dilemma right now for Brian Kelly.